before joining the Foreign Service, which is 34 years ago, I was a teacher for 5 years. And to be honest, I was not sure when I started my academic studies whether I not wanted to be a clergyman. So a teacher in a church, that's about what you are seeing right now. Welcome to this venue. For those of you who ask themselves, who is he? I'm the Dutch ambassador to Turkey. I'm based in Ankara, which is a brilliant idea of Atatürk's of the 1920s, but is a pity as far as real estate is concerned, because the Consul General is one of the most happy persons in the Dutch Foreign Service, because he does not only have a very beautiful residence, he has this chapel, this church as well. We welcome you to this afternoon of discussion, and actually, as you might imagine, is the core business of diplomats. Our main function this afternoon is cutting the ribbon, which I'm doing right now, and hosting the reception, which will take place afterwards. The content is being taken care of by the people here behind the desk, and maybe by you, the audience, in interacting with what is being said here behind the desk and among yourselves. I would like to wish you a very fruitful afternoon, challenging ideas in a, let's say, not too warm atmosphere, and cold drinks will be served afterwards, but you have to deserve those cold drinks. So if you do think that the Consul General will open the bar at 3:30, you're wrong. It will take somewhat more time. Ladies and gentlemen, since this is an act for two gentlemen, myself being the ambassador, but the Consul General being the host as far as the location is concerned, I would like to give the floor right away to the Consul General, because he's your friend this afternoon, taking care of what's happening in the garden afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, have a nice afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to welcome you very warmly here to the Dutch Chapel for this afternoon, and I'm very glad that we can co-host this afternoon together with the ambassador from Ankara and the Consul General myself here. And I think that is an indication of the value we attach and the importance we attach to cultural cooperation, that of course from Ankara and Istanbul our international cultural policy towards Turkey is supported very much. The ambassador already made reference to the difference between Ankara and Istanbul, and I could tell you a lot of silly jokes about that, which I will not do, but this week I heard a new variation, and that is one of my colleague Consul Generals here in Istanbul told that she had, I will not mention which country, told that she had a new ambassador, and this was a very strange ambassador because this ambassador rarely laughed nor smiled, but she wanted to make a good impression on him. And when they first met, they chatted, and then at a certain moment she asked him, but you will certainly come to Istanbul very often. And then the ambassador asked, why? Now, we are in a very fortunate position that we have an ambassador who can laugh and smile very much, and I don't need to explain to him the reason to come to Istanbul. So we're very grateful for that, Jan Paul. Actually, of course, this meeting takes place in the context of the Biennale. The Biennale is very much about contemporary arts, and in the discussion later this afternoon, Biennials as platform for social change. But we find ourselves, of course, in a very cultural environment. The ambassador already referred to that. Actually, this is the Dutch Chapel, as we call it. We don't have a real Dutch expression for it. But the chapel is the oldest building here on the premises, and this year the chapel exists exactly 300 years. It was built in 1711. You will be able to see our grounds and the palais later after you've worked hard to deserve that. Next year, of course, 300 years, the chapel this year. Next year, 400 years of Dutch-Turkish diplomatic relations. We see this event also very much as a stepping stone towards intensive cultural contact between the scene in the Netherlands and the players here in Istanbul and Turkey as a whole. That this can happen here in the church is of course, a special event. At the same time, it is very much in line with the experience. This church, as I said, built in 1711, was used in the beginning very much for the worship of the Dutch envoy and his staff. But then in later years it had different purposes. It served as a storage building, and at a certain moment the basement even served as a prison. But I will let you out in time today, so don't worry. But today we make use of the building also in various ways. The Union Church of Istanbul uses this for worshipping every Sunday and Christian holidays. We use it for discussions, for film festivals, and even for art shows. So once again, I would like to welcome you very much. The final thing I'm going to say is that, of course, the Biennale is untitled. Fortunately, we have compensated for that to have a very long title on the invitation. But I will not dwell on that, but I will give the floor to Marieke to further introduce the team tonight. Thank you very much.
Immediately to Francesco to start,
okay.
And then
So thank you to everybody to be here. I'm a co-organizer of this with Marieke and Maurizio Bortolotti, and I'm the founder director of the Faculty Media Design and New Media Art in Milano in the NABA. NABA means New Academy of Fine Arts. It's the New Academy of Fine Arts. So we founded this 5 years ago, and five years ago we started with a BA level, then a PhD with Roy Ascott, and last year we launched the MA level. Is in film and new media, in media design and new media art, and the problematic is the crisis of display. The problematic is the crisis of the film system, and we strongly support this because we need a new knowledge, we need a new point of view on the merge that is happening between art practice and traditional media practice. So for example, the new directors, they are coming from the contemporary art scene, and we call this post-cinema. There's a big debate on the post-cinema. There is a big crisis on the display of the traditional cinema, and there is a big crisis on the way we are storytelling the story, because there is the interactivity. And so we are really interested on trying to develop a dialogue between these two worlds, that they are not easy to merge for some reason, because they are two different contexts, but I strongly believe on that, and I'm working on this in Italy with the help of Maurizio Bortolotti, that is helping me in this really strong and difficult task. However, we had resonance and interest all around the world for this idea of the post-cinema. There is also a lot of writers that they are working in Italy on that, the young generation of writers. They are also the most famous, but we don't know how they still to be young, because in Italy everybody is young. And they start with this new idea of a new Italian epic. New Italian epic means this new kind of romance of literature that is not a romance, it's not a reportage, and the manifesto is Gomorra, because in Italy we export this fantastic cultural product, mafia, you know. After that, there is the same situation in movies. For example, I just came from, I arrived here from Ars Electronica in Linz, in Austria, and I saw a fantastic movie, a terrifying movie, and it's titled Into Eternity. It's a kind of elegia, a dramatic elegia on the end of the human species through the toxic nuclear waste. And, but it's not a movie. There is not so many movies in the Biennial of Movie of Venice, the film festival. Instead, they open a new, very interesting competition for artists inside the Biennial. So I'm very glad to do this, to organize this with Marieke, and I will look with a very deep interest to the proceedings of all the colleagues that they are here to debate, to discuss about these topics. Thank you.
Hello? Recep, is it working? Yeah? Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador and Mr. Dirkse, Consul General, hosting us here today in Istanbul, in this wonderful location, where we are very pleased and warm to be here, and where we hopefully will be enlightened by the atmosphere of the church and experience the blessing of community with people from many countries and backgrounds, as I was reading in the membership application for the Union Church. Thank you, Francesco, for being our partner. My name is, maybe I should say, Marieke van Haal. I'm director of the Biennial Foundation. We are a very new, young organization founded about a year and a half ago. Basically, the foundation aims to create a platform for exchange and collaboration and research between the various biennales and triennales of contemporary art in the world. As one may know, there's over 100, about 150 biennales operating in different places worldwide around the globe. They share a lot of common practices and missions, but at the same time they can be extremely diverse in their identity and in their outcomes. So as a foundation, we try to create a notion of collegial spirit between these organizations and provide platforms for meeting points and exchange, etc. And this is actually one of our first, we thought small scale, but you came with a large amount of people, event, and which we will follow up hopefully next year with a bigger forum, which we will call the World Biennial Forum, which we aim to organize and co-produce in collaboration with the Gwangju Biennale in South Korea, and the director of the Gwangju Biennale is here with us, Mr. Young-Woo Lee. This forum, this World Biennial Forum, aims to be a platform where practitioners, professionals that work at the organizations of Biennale can meet and convene and discuss their problems, their successes, their failures, their experiences in all these different places in the world where biennials exist and or stop to exist or new are initiated. So simply, it's a collaboration. We're here with NABA, the media department. We have indeed a very long title. And this has to do with the fact that we are two organizations with, both our own perspectives, which we hope both to elaborate upon here, but I think we will manage. There will be two sessions, just to simply explain you the composition. Sorry.
Just I forgot to mention that it's in partnership with the ICEA, the International Symposium of Electronic Arts. This is interesting also because it was founded and it took birth in Netherlands.
Yeah. In the 90s, yeah. So we're here at the occasion of two events, basically, yes. The 12th Istanbul Biennale, which hopefully maybe you have seen already, it opened a few days ago, as well as ICEA 2011, and the artistic director of ICEA is sitting here, Lanfranco Aceti, is also one of our guests in the second panel. So we're here at the occasion, basically, indeed, of two events, two cultural events in Istanbul. What else do I need to explain? So the setup of today is two sessions, each 1 hour. This is going to be our first session. We invited for each session a biennial director, an artist, and in the first session we have a curator, and in the second session we have our academic expert, Lanfranco, to reflect upon the issues we would like to discuss. Generally, as an introduction, I think about the topic, well, as I said, we're here at the occasion of two events, the Biennale. I don't know if you've seen the Biennale, but I've been looking around yesterday a little bit. To me it seems very beautiful, a very aesthetic Biennale, very compact, very sensitive, very formalistic, maybe modernist. To me, having seen and visiting a lot of Biennales today internationally, it seems to me a clear reaction to previous Biennales that have been taking place, not only here in Istanbul, but also in other places. The Biennale, as I said, can be very diverse. We tend to be, as art professionals, extremely self-critical about our own exhibition practice. And I think this Biennale is also a reaction to actually the development of the Biennale, which in, let's say, the last 8 years, there was a kind of fashion or development of the Biennale being a platform to discuss social issues and concerns, perhaps more than being an exhibition in the more, let's say, aesthetical perspective. So I hope we can also discuss this as a context for us being here together. Yeah, I think I should introduce the speakers of the first session. We're starting exactly in time at 3 o'clock, very good. So the first session will have a bit of more emphasis on the Biennale as exhibition platform, and the second session will have a bit more accentuation towards this question of what is the role of the media in art and exhibition practices. So this is a little bit the composition. I'd like to welcome our first guests here at the table. Next to me, Mrs. Hedwig Fijen, founding director and overall director of Manifesta, the European Biennale of Contemporary Art, which hopefully you know, an originally Dutch initiative from '96 was the first edition in Rotterdam. A very special Biennale that moves to different places every 2 years, different places in Europe, so it's within a European context. And yeah, has a very investigational and very research-oriented ideal, let's say, I would say, based upon, as I know, Hedwig, being an historian and art historian, on a sincere interest in the history of Europe, the changes in Europe, in the changes of the social, political dynamics within Europe, etc. So, Hedwig, we've asked each participant to have a short introduction on their practice, basically, and then there's time for questions, a few by me, and of course by you, all of the audience. Katarina Gregos, welcome, is a freelance curator and writer. We invited her basically because of a very interesting exhibition she organized this year, in the Venice Biennale. She was elected by the Danish Arts Council to compose an exhibition in the Danish Pavilion at the 54th Biennale, Venice Biennale edition, which was already special because I think it was the first time there was an international curator, no? Yeah. She made an exhibition, which was, she proposed, I think there were a few curators proposed, and you were the final, yeah? Which was called Speech Matters, and which dealt with issues of freedom of speech. A very critical exhibition, very important exhibition, we thought, because, and it also relates, I think, to the Danish, I mean, as a base. We will explain a little bit better the Danish cartoons that created a lot of debate and problematics, and it was a starting point, as far as I understand, for this exhibition. So it dealt with a lot of issues, issues of censorship, issues of freedom of expression, human rights, etc. So Katarina will speak a bit about that. The third guest on our table is Nazim Dikbas, our Turkish participant, who's also an artist and participant in the Istanbul Biennale. Currently, you might have seen his work. It's actually the first work you see in the building opposite Entrepot, right? Yeah. He has one of the solo exhibitions with drawings. Anyway, he will show some of his work. We invited him because we were interested to have a person from Turkey, from the Turkish point, from the artist point of view here. Nazim is also, apart from being an artist, an educator. He teaches at the Bilgi University here, as well as a high-level translator, which I was very impressed by. Translator of books by one of the most well-famous well-known Turkish writers, Orhan Pamuk, but also writers like Nabokov and others. So his practice, I think, is really on the border of a few disciplines. And I think it's very interesting to hear also from him his knowledge and his experience with the Istanbul Biennale and his participation within. So I think this is enough introduction. And maybe Hedwig here would like to start with yeah?
Can I use this one? Okay. Maybe we can put on the computer. Thank you, NABA and Biennial Foundation for inviting me. I had a long presentation, but I was told that I can only speak for 10 minutes, so the entire story of Manifesta is for another time. So we'll focus on some major issues. What is Manifesta? Because Manifesta is known as one of the few biennials which embedded its origin in the social changes of the 90s in Europe. As you see, the origin of Manifesta based on a geopolitical disbalance of Europe east-west. And it was an initiative in the 90s by 15 European countries who could not understand that by the fall of the Berlin Wall, artistic practices were not shared from one part of Europe and the other part. So you will see, I will speak while the presentation, which lasted normally half an hour, will continuously go on. And I reduced my talk to two issues, actually, about what Manifesta is. First, what is the relevance and the legacy, as you saw in my first slide, what is the relevance and the legacy of a roving biennial? Manifesta is the only biennial in the world which is moving from one city to another. As you know, also the cultural capital, but this is like a really biennial practice event. And I think it is important to understand that Manifesta is doing research in mostly the peripheral parts of Europe, as you see where we were in the last almost 2 decades, the peripheral parts of Europe in which we investigate politics, status of Europe's cultural identity, geopolitics, urbanity, the status of urbanity, technology, and based on this research, a host city is being selected. We don't have like a permanent base. We are a moving initiative. And this is, of course, very much embedded in the social political changes of Europe. This is why some people think Manifesta is a political party. Manifesta is an NGO. Manifesta is serving the European cultural administration. We're not. We are biennial, which doesn't even have a fixed administrative and economical basis. So we have to prove every 2 years our economical basis in Europe, but also our artistic basis. And this is what I would like to talk with you about, because how is a European biennial able to function as a platform for social change? And what is its relevance for it today? Was it only a relevance in the 90s, where Europe was changing fastly in this kind of post-industrial period, but also in terms of this uniting and balancing out the dialogue between East and West, and hasn't it been shifted? And this is exactly the topic where I think every Manifesta is very much focused on. The relevance of the Manifesta is based on its site-specificness. Where does Manifesta turns up has a very site-specific connotation of what is the status of Europe today. Also, one of the basic parameters which we need to prove every time, is it possible for a biennial to reinvent itself every time? I'm looking to Marta Rosler, who's sitting on the first row, because, for example, we had one Manifesta, Manifesta 6, which had an artistic curatorial statement turning a biennial into an art school, turning a representational format of a biennial into an art school. What does it mean? We landed in Nicosia, Cyprus, and after doing the research in this urbanity, in this political context, it was decided by the curators that this context didn't need an exhibition, but it needed a school, a theoretical, academic, basic format on which other productions, practices could be based. So Manifesta needs to have this focus of reinventing. And as it might, and as it turned out, experiments can fail. That's why it is an experiment. But maybe, as Marta Rosler said at that time, maybe it was more important to underline what was the importance of Europe at that moment in Cyprus, that the experiment failed, that the freedom of speech, the freedom of putting a school together between the Turkish and the Greek part was not possible in 2006. This is one example to give to you to underline this kind of artistic research. So again, what is the basic parameter of Manifesta on which we try to prove our relevance in the art world is this artistic research and the curatorial research. And I will go back later a little bit about the artistic and the curatorial research. In the meanwhile, you see many pictures of many venues, and specifically venues of Manifesta 8, which was the last edition in Murcia, Cartagena, with the subtitle Dialogue with Northern Africa. When we closed the Manifesta 8 with 3 curatorial teams, amongst one from Egypt, the revolution on the Tahrir Square in Cairo started. But to come back to this, what were the 4 parameters on which the relevance, the legacy of a nomadic biennial is based? Site-specificness, as I said today, research-based biennial, knowledge transfer, and I just end up by accident in the picture where you see this mediation team. Manifesta can only prove its relevance to a community, and these communities are always in the periphery, if we can prove that not only to the elite, not only to the artistic circles, but a larger audience is able to participate in the discourse of what a biennial wants to stage. And I think the core business, the core interest in Manifesta is also to create a responsiveness to this community, to create a kind of a relationship. And we do this by not starting guided tours, for example, as an education program at the opening, but the mediation and education program starts 2 years before. And I'm sitting, not by accident, I think, next to my colleague, Katarina Gregos, who's also an associate curator in Manifesta 9 in Genk, Belgium. And she can also underline, I hope, that the mediation part of interacting with different audiences is part of a long-term trajectory, not only one day before the opening serving certain audiences. I want to give some examples, and I'm just with David Ridge, because everybody's always asking, how can Manifesta prove this kind of social relevance for communities, but also for the international? And I want to give like 2 examples. This is what you see here is a film of Abed Anouti, a Lebanese artist. It's going now, it's going again. Manifesta 8 was taking place on 2 cities, Cartagena and Murcia, Andalusia, Dialogue with Northern Africa, and 150 artists were invited to make a special new work based on research in the region. And Abed Anouti, the Lebanese artist, found a prison in Cartagena which served during the Franco War, the Civil War, but what was closed. And he was the first, and this is giving a little bit of an example of what kind of impact certain artistic practices in Manifesta had. He made a film with the players, the people who were still alive in Cartagena, who were either imprisoned in the Cartagena Franco regime, and which stories have never been told. And when the film was finally released during the Biennale, it provoked an enormous discussion. Why, for example, in post-Franco times, even saying 40 years later, this discussion about the history of certain venues who played an important role was still not open at the table. Of course, we could not monitor it. It is taken over by our local partners in the city, but this is one example. Another example which I want to give you on basis of what could be the legacy of a biennial except for producing works of contemporary art. And I think I can give you 2 examples. In Manifesta 8, also taking place in Murcia and Cartagena, we had 3 curatorial teams, one from Central Europe, one from Middle East, Beirut, and one from Northern Africa. And the team from Northern Africa, Bassam Al-Baroni from Alexandria Contemporary Art Forum, said, listen, Hedwig, I want to do a special project to try to investigate if something like Manifesta, a nomadic research-based biennial, could function in Africa. But in Africa there are, of course, not this kind of feasibility studies or faculty research studies. Could we use the budget of Manifesta to create an incubator? A project which has a question: would a nomadic art event in a Pan-African context survive, and under which condition, which assumptions? And I said, I think this is exactly what Manifesta is for. This is exactly what we should do. And the answer should be no, because an experiment cannot always have the kind of positive outcome. So what actually was composed as part of the Manifesta Biennial is the Incubator Project, a project in which 6 artist initiatives from different parts of Africa were researching, investigating, talking with each other about potentiality of a Pan-African nomadic event. They staged a symposium, they created a website, and had different investigation meetings with the most important artists and stakeholders from the Pan-African continent. It was very interesting during the opening symposium, during the opening of Manifesta 8, that the end of the process was, no, a Manifesta in Africa is not what we want, but we want to reinvent Manifesta for the specific context in Africa, and that is now going to be started with very small, tiny little projects which would travel through Africa. This is one example in which you maybe cannot completely monitor or calculate the social impact or the impact of a project, but at least we are trying to investigate, we are trying to embrace these kind of projects and also follow up. Another project which I think is like maybe iconic for what Manifesta tries to do, one of the curatorial teams from Central Europe, transit.org, a media organization consisting of 5 different artist initiatives. They were actually proposing, can we use the Manifesta to criticize, to re-investigate the model of the biennials, the format of the biennials? So what they actually did, they created a project which was called Constitution of Temporarily Display. They wanted to readjust, criticize the constitutions between artists, curators, about how the format of a biennial is working. And it was a very interesting process to see, because it was not an easy process, it was a very complicated process, because the process itself became the exhibition. And the process itself became also the follow-up of what the exhibition should be. And of course there is the immediate question here, what is the relevance for the community? How could the community participate in this process? And this is also, I think, one of my, hopefully not rhetorical questions, but I think which could be answered in this panel. Are we able, as Marieke has and the Biennial Foundation and the NABA has said, are we able to, since biennials are not fixed identities, I think biennials are flexible formats which need to change, which need to reinvestigate its own existence constantly. Aren't we able to also re-identify this kind of social impact? Shouldn't we look very much into the relevance of this, as Manifesta is constantly trying to do? And also, shouldn't we, like what I always do when we arrive in a new Manifesta city, shouldn't we also like scale down the expectation? What is a biennial, or what is an exhibition or artistic practices really able to do, and what is the final outcome of all our activities, all our artistic practices, and how do we need to monitor this? How do we need to analyze this? How do we need to reevaluate it? And this is, I think, what I would love to talk a little bit more about all the projects, but I see that I already passed the 10 minutes, so maybe we could come back of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hedwig, for a really interesting introduction about Manifesto as a very unique biennale, and with a, as far as I know, no compared other biennales which have this model of moving to different cities and investigating different territories within Europe. Let's move on to Katarina Gregos, who will explain a little bit about the exhibition she made in Venice, Speech Matters, and she will also give a presentation, and then I think the questions will come after. Nobody fainting yet?
So I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much, Hedwig, for your presentation. Thank you also to the ambassador and the consul for hosting us here in this beautiful location, and of course to Marieke and the Biennial Foundation for inviting us. I also prepared a half-an-hour presentation, which I will try to condense in 10 minutes. I'm going to talk, as Marieke said, about the project that I curated for the Danish Pavilion in Venice this year. A very political exhibition in what I would say is one of the lesser political biennials, though that doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of cultural politics is not going on in the context of the Venice Biennial. I'd like to give you a little bit of the background behind the project, how it happened, and why I selected to work with this question of freedom of speech. I have to say, without blowing our own horn, that the Danish Pavilion in Venice this year was an unusual pavilion. It certainly challenged the notion of what a national representation in Venice is. First of all, it featured 18 international artists, only 2 of whom were actually Danish, and of course a foreign curator. And to me, what was rather bizarre when I started out on this project was, although we've all talked about the outmoded nature of the national representation in Venice, and this has been a discourse that has been going on for a very, very long time, it seems to me that this is still a given. And this was reflected very much in a question that kept popping up repeatedly when I mentioned I was curating the Danish Pavilion. The question that I was always asked was not, what are you doing, but how come you're curating the Danish Pavilion? Meaning, how come me, as a curator who's coming from Greece and living in Belgium, has been entrusted this national representation? So I think that reflects quite a lot the current thinking about at least the Venice Biennale. In thinking about the Danish Pavilion, I wanted to work with a subject that of course relates to Venice, but also has more ecumenical, let's say, parameters. So I chose to work with the question of freedom of speech, which is one of the most contentious topics of our day. And of course, the debate around freedom of speech has been fundamentally reignited in light of both the Danish cartoon scandal and of course 9/11 and all the geopolitical shifts since then. I must hasten to add that the exhibition was not about the Danish cartoon scandals, but in fact about a general pathology, which I think is afflicting Western and non-Western society. I think we are in a very unfortunate time of regression, a time where civil liberties are being put increasingly under threat, and that things that were hard-earned civil liberties that have been fought for in the post-war period are now under threat for all of us. And we tend to think of limits on our freedom only in relation to authoritarian societies, but I would say that this is something that is happening also in Western so-called liberal societies as well. So I decided to work with freedom of speech precisely because I thought it was one of the most contested issues in the public debate. And of course it relates to a host of issues in the current social and political debate. I can mention some of them. Press intimidation in Russia, the recent Google episode in China, the WikiLeaks scandal, increasing surveillance in the UK and the USA, often under the pretext of safety and security, quote unquote. The recent events in North Africa, and of course, very highly charged debates in many European countries, including, of course, the Netherlands at the moment. So the notion of freedom of speech is, of course, huge, but it's also such a global issue because it touches upon so many different issues, political, social, cultural, as well as personal. And of course, it impacts upon a lot of issues that concern us in our public and our private life, from freedom of press and internet freedom, copyright and intellectual property, the privatization of knowledge, the erosion of public space, protest and public order, human rights, the question of self-censorship, judicial and legal questions, and the list is quite endless. So my exhibition had one key aim, and that was to complicate the question of freedom of speech, which unfortunately also has become popularized in the media and has been dealt with in a very black and white way, often in terms of polarities, them and us, Islam and the West, when in fact it is an extremely complex and often ambiguous issue to negotiate. So some of the questions that I was interested in exploring in fact relate to these very, very gray zones. First of all, what do we mean by freedom of speech today? Where does my freedom end and your freedom begin? Are there reasonable limits that can be put on freedom of speech? And if so, who decides them? And what about the myth of total free speech? Because, of course, every speech act carries an act of responsibility. So freedom of speech in that case is always context dependent, depending of course also on personal, cultural, social and religious circumstances. So hence the exhibition Speech Matters. I think the title is quite self-explanatory. And I should say that in thinking about the exhibition, I was aware I was taking a very big risk in many ways, and it's a risk that I did want to take. I remember a couple of years ago a colleague telling me that doing a group exhibition in Venice is curatorial suicide. And that's something that I carried with me for quite a while. But unfortunately, it's not possible to do an exhibition on a subject as complex as freedom of speech without taking into account, first of all, the notion of polyphony, and of course, the comparative nature of the issue. So as I said before, the exhibition includes 18 artists, only 2 of whom are Danish. I have to say that it was quite extraordinary to work within the Danish context, a context which is also under threat at the moment. And I was given complete curatorial freedom to decide both the artists and the subject. I think I need to mention this because this is not often the case in an important context for national representation like Venice. When I asked the Danish Arts Council whether there was a quota in relation to the Danish artists that that should be represented, I was told that I didn't have to include Danish artists if I didn't want to. But I thought that would be a very, very empty statement, so I included, of course, 2 Danish artists. I would very much have liked to present all the artists, as I find it very difficult to make a selective presentation, but at least here you can see the list of artists, many of whom actually come from areas or geographies or regions where the question of freedom of speech at the moment is a fundamental debate, a contentious debate. And I should say that the majority of the works were also new commissions. So part of a process, a dialogue that we had, my team and myself, in relation to this very, very complex subject. I'd like to give you a small virtual tour of the exhibition as fast as I can. I'm often accused of talking like a machine gun. I hope I'm not doing that here, but I'm also looking at the clock. This is the interior of the Danish pavilion. For those of you who have not been to Venice, it comprises two buildings, a neoclassical building built in the 1930s, which you can see here, and also a more modernist building built in the 1960s. I decided to work with an architect for the architecture of the pavilion. I invited Tilman Wendland, an artist, not an architect, to work with the architecture, precisely because I wanted to avoid any form of spectacularization, and I wanted to create a context where the works of the artist could be seen and where the architecture wouldn't subsume the exhibition and the works. And here, very quickly, you can see some of the very subtle interventions that Tilman Wendland created in the exhibition. So a platform for the work of Sharon Hayes, which you can see on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, also a work by Koba Matisse Agency, a Belgium-based collective dealing with questions of intellectual property and copyright. Taryn Simon in the middle, presenting two projects. On the left, Zhang Dali, a Chinese artist who presented work in relation to censorship incidents in the media during the reign of Mao in China. This is the project of Agency, where you could actually take out a box relating to specific cases of contested intellectual property and copyright issues. And again, Zhang Dali. Paintings by the Iranian artist Tala Madani, a more kind of introspective and I would say poetic form of politicality in the exhibition. Works by Taryn Simon. The exhibition was actually split into two parts, metaphorically speaking, a very light part, which you just saw, and a darker part. And here on the left you can see a work by Wendelin van Oldenborg, a Dutch artist. Robert Crumb, a key figure that was included in the exhibition. There were also, I should mention, artists of different generations. So the oldest artist was born in 1934 and the youngest in 1981. And for me it was really important also to work with artists of different generations because I think we're all a little bit tired of the kind of upcoming only young artist, and I think it's really important to acknowledge artists who are in mid-career and who are later, at a later point in their life, who are producing, I think, maybe some of the most interesting work in the career. Robert Crumb was included precisely because he's a symbolic figure and someone who exercises unequivocal freedom of speech, I would say, often really stretching the boundaries. Historical artist from the Czech Republic, Jan Schwankmeyer. This work, The Garden, was also a point of departure for the exhibition, a story about a house which is owned by someone who belonged to the communist nomenclatura in the 60s, and this house is surrounded by a human fence. Irene Anastas and René Gabri. And very quickly, because I would like to put a full stop, just to mention a little bit about the question of politicality and the notion of the private and the public, especially in relation to Venice. Sorry, I don't know how to get this away. Just okay, thank you. One of the things that I also wanted to do is to somehow activate the public space around the Danish pavilion. I think the Venice Biennale is not what we would consider an entirely public space. It's in fact a quasi-public space. It is exclusive. Only certain people can enter it. And the fact is also that a national pavilion is also in a way a kind of exclusive territory belonging to each country. It functions very much as an embassy, as an ambassador. And of course the National Pavilion is very much governed by this idea of like interiority. So here you can see a new mural done by the Greek artist Stelios Faitakis, commissioned especially for the Danish pavilion, a story in 6 chapters, all relating to very famous incidents of censorship in the 20th century. It took 1 month for the artist to do this work with 2 assistants, and I have to make a short note because right across from the Danish pavilion, this was of course a very labor-intensive work, was the project of Alora and Calzadilla for the American pavilion, which constituted of this upside-down tank, this kind of ready-made that was transported to Venice. And I kind of saw this and thought, really, this is really, in a way, the clash of civilizations, you know, the ready-made, which has taken tons of money to transport, and a young artist from a tiny, unimportant country in crisis at the moment, toiling away to produce this fabulous work. There was a third pavilion constructed by the German artist Thomas Kilper, the Pavilion for Revolutionary Free Speech, on which were emblazoned woodcuts of, I would say, a portrait gallery of rather objectionable figures from the political right wing in Europe at the moment, which also featured Speaker's Corner, where we had a series of performances. Here a performance by Lilibeth Cuenca Rasmussen and Mikhail Karikis. And also this platform was used for debates, discussions, exchanges. And finally, we had one truly public project. This was very important, of course, in relation to the discussion around freedom of speech and the exclusive space of the Venice Biennial. A project by the Danish artist Foss, Oslo, which was a floating pavilion which comprised 3 formal elements: a bar, a stage for events, free events, concert, lectures, performances, and a radio station. And this was docked on the island of San Servolo and was accessible to all. And it was rather fabulous. It had also the best view on the sunset in Venice. Very nice. And I think I'll stop there. Yes, I'm being kicked under the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katarina, for this really, the machine gun presentation. It was very forceful and interesting. I see some really interesting overlaps, I think, which we can also discuss in the second panel. As you spoke about, and maybe we can discuss it a little bit more later. Yeah, the issue of freedom of speech, the WikiLeaks scandal, the privatization of knowledge, internet freedom, what does that mean? I think these are issues that we're also going to elaborate on a little bit more in the next panel, also with Youngwoo from Korea, etc. So thank you so much. We will come back a bit more on this later, and I would like to give the floor to Nazim to also explain us a little bit more about his artistic practice in the context also of the Istanbul Biennial, his participation, and perhaps also yeah, the development of the Istanbul Biennial. We've been talking about it yesterday a little bit, and this edition.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everyone involved in the conference, in the speech. Maybe it's best to begin a little with the work and then see perhaps how the work connects with what we've just already talked about. Katarina mentioned Robert Crumb. One of the great artists that I continue to be influenced by. And there are, of course, others. Another is Raymond Petitbon, who I'm honored to be in the same exhibition with. He's in the Death by Gun section. And also, I mean, other names that come to mind: Glenn Baxter, Myra Kalman, Tuncer Erdem, a Turkish artist, a great Turkish artist, Ardeshir Muasses, the Iranian artist. And what I find in their works, and what I also try to achieve, is something that the more mainstream, perhaps cartoon or illustration or drawing or sketching work doesn't go into, which is a more intimate world, a world between perhaps fact and fiction, and the world of those thoughts that pass through our minds, but we never actually say. These could be very positive thoughts, or they could be extremely violent, negative thoughts, or they could be just these thoughts or words of hesitation. So they're about the in-between. They're about the in-between that we sometimes never say. And of course, it's not always a we. I try to think, I try to understand also what people I don't understand might be thinking, what passes through their mind in their action, what passes through them through their mind. How do they justify their actions to themselves? How do they explain what they do to themselves and each other? And I mean, there are a few common themes that come up, which I've just thought about listening to Hedwig and Christina. One is progress. Progress is, of course, one of the great modern illusions. And we only realize that progress isn't actually constant when what we so dearly hold is taken away from us. And this includes, of course, our most basic rights, including freedom of speech, freedom of expression, our basic human rights. And so progress has always been the great claim of, let's say, a more central modernist project, that everything will continue to improve, everything will continue to be better. As we know, it's not the case. And perhaps this work is related to that. I mean, it's in Turkish, but the translation goes, the real miracle is the dust cloud itself. There is a perhaps bastardized version of Darwinian theory. Darwin himself, a great scientist, he never simplified, and he always had a great eye for detail. But perhaps the likes of Herbert Spencer and his students, they simplified the theory, and there is this joke, the more humorous interpretation of the more simplified theory of progress, theory of evolution, that goes from gas to genius. Okay, this quick progress from gas to genius. And the dust cloud refers to that ancient moment of creation. And I believe that that moment still exists. That is, that we are still in that moment, and that moment is always here. And if we tend to think, if we tend to focus too much on progress, which is basically saying that the past is gone and we're going towards the future, we either focus too much on the future or too much on the past, and the present and the problems of the present, or the crisis of the present we live in at the moment, gets trivialized. And that's another perhaps theme I try to focus on, try to understand what happens in the minds of people, including myself, when we don't even realize what's going through our heads. The multiple voices, some louder than others, and what they work towards. So maybe I should go on to the biennial and what it has meant for us. And Marieke already mentioned that I also teach at Bilgi University. I also work as a translator, and very proudly I've been a viewer of the Istanbul Biennial since the first edition, to which my mother took me in 1987, and which was great. And it was a great moment for us. I wasn't that young, I was 14. And since then, of course, I've gone back to all the biennials, reading about them. Also at the recent conference, the Remembering Istanbul conference, which has been brought together in this book here, where each curator speaks about their experience of the different editions of the Istanbul Biennial. Of course, they were all quite different biennials, and a lot has changed, but there are several aspects of the Istanbul Biennial, looking at it from first of all, my own perspective, then an Istanbul perspective, then a Turkey perspective, and then perhaps a more regional perspective, to understand what it means to us. We are obviously, being so close to it, often quite critical of what happens in the biennial in various levels, from the choice of artists to the curator, to the sponsors, to attendance levels, and to the presentation, to prices, etc. But at the same time, I feel we're also very protective of it, because it is the event on the art calendar here in Istanbul. and it is the event that brings people together. The other day, on the 15th, 2 days ago, the great artist Sarkis was at the next table, and he came to chat with us, and he emphasized again what he had said at the Remembering Istanbul conference, and it's something I agree with very strongly. He said 2 months is too short for the Istanbul Biennial. We need a biennial format which should spread out over the 2 years. You say it's a 2-yearly event. This doesn't necessarily have to be an exhibition or exhibitions, but perhaps conferences, perhaps talks, perhaps workshops, and I think the educational aspect here is something which can be further built upon, because for us, the biennial itself has been the education. In Istanbul, we have 2 art schools. One is now the Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, which is known as the Academy, based on the French model, on the École des Beaux-Arts model. And then we also have the Marmara University, which is based, the Applied Arts faculty, which is based on the Bauhaus model. But nothing more recent than that. And they're both suffering in their own way of being outmoded and not exactly understanding what's going on in the contemporary art world. Some trying to keep up with what's going on, some, I don't know, let's say, jealous of the dynamism in the contemporary art world. But what strikes me is that since the 80s, we've had this great flourish of new schools, new universities being founded in Istanbul, but not one of the private universities has gone on to found an experimental, a contemporary art school. Although there is, I would say, a very strong contemporary art scene with a lot of, I see it in my students as well, who are either visual communication students or art management, cultural management students, so not artists, who are extremely interested in art. Some do want to become artists, some are not so, let's say, brave because they're not actually studying art. But this is something that's missing here. And so for them, this kind of event, which makes people remember, feel international, because they are, is the first step to their education in contemporary art. That was the first idea behind the founding of the Istanbul Biennial. There was a contemporary art scene, already a strong contemporary art scene perhaps, people with very strong ideas, strong dedication to contemporary art. But the first edition of the Istanbul Biennial, curated by Beral Madra, aimed to bring the Turkish contemporary art scene, the Istanbul, the Turkey contemporary art scene, in contact with the international art scene. And that has been the objective since. And this is by no means like opening the doors to something that didn't exist before. Istanbul or Turkey or everyone here was international anyway, but it's just one aspect of identity which gets blocked off because of conditions. And I mean, so I would put here the emphasis on perhaps loosening, releasing the emphasis on concepts like race, nationality, which I don't think serve many purposes, and try to understand what it means to be international. And I think that's what the viewers of the Biennial begin to breathe, begin to see, and begin to critically take part in. And I think that's been the strongest, greatest contribution of the Biennial as an event. So the nature, the content of each edition is different. I think this one is also a quite different Biennial from the previous ones. But as an event, this is what it brings. And we know that the approximate attendance to the Biennial is around 100,000 people. This time around, I've had this sort of, let's say, educated guess and a strong hope that perhaps this number can increase. And this I see because I talk to students, I talk to my students' friends, these people who are 18, 19, 20, not only coming themselves, but talking and writing about it. And I think this is where media comes in. Because the mainstream media in Turkey, this is probably what's most different in Turkey from European countries, is almost not interested at all, let alone in contemporary art, but in art, you know. The biennial will become perhaps news for a day, and only because it has opened. Art becomes news only if there's sensation involved, if there's big prizes involved. If an artist, or I don't know, a museum director did something wrong in a nightclub or something. Okay. Otherwise, there are a few newspapers, a very, very small number of newspapers who have art critics, but then even with these newspapers, we have witnessed very recently, back in 2007, that they, in a day, with no excuse, sacked the entire culture and arts department and they were gone, you know, for cost-cutting purposes. So, I mean, we cherish our few art critics, and I mean, we don't see them as art critics, we see them as one of us. But this is it. Now with social media, with the internet, I couldn't pinpoint a major influence in our art world, which is this website which has managed to bring the contemporary art scene together. That hasn't happened yet, but there are some small sites, small blogs, people writing about art, people commenting on art, critically, strongly, sometimes naively, but it is beginning to happen, and this is broken. This has gone through that stronghold of the mainstream media of what is happening in Turkey today. And so now people can communicate through social media and internet, although it's not to the level the scene deserves. I think it is going in a good direction, and I think that would also contribute to the influence of the biennial. But I think, I mean, the two things, media and education, you know, the biennial itself serves as its own medium. It serves as its own school. I don't think it's strong enough in that sense. It could be much stronger if it was spread out over a longer period of time and supported with, let's say, I mean, it's a much used word, with more interactive events. But I think it's there as something that continues to live in a very, very strong way.
Thank you, Nazim, for your wonderful talk and explaining us about working as an artist, about the functioning of the Biennale here, and about actually, something we discovered yesterday together, pre-discussing the enormous educational impact the Istanbul Biennale apparently has. What I learned from you here, which is interesting because with Manifesta, with Hedwig, we talked about the number 6th edition in Nicosia, which was an exhibition turned into an art school, whereas here we are facing a Biennale that actually takes up, maybe unconsciously or even not so, because I've never read about so much about this educational impact it has for the young, especially young Turkish art scene, because this is what I was wondering, like how come Turkey doesn't have strong art schools where you're so strong in, as a young cultural art scene presented here, not only in Turkey but also internationally. Where did you learn? And it's apparently the Biennale that has fulfilled this role here, which is extremely interesting. I think because we are very short in time, I had some questions, but I think it's more fair to give the floor to the people in the room. If there are some questions from the audience, we are open to discuss these. In the back, can Recep, he has a mobile microphone. Can somebody bring it? Yes, for the recording, please.
Hello, my name is Nazim. I have a question for Hedwig. I was just wondering, because Manifesta is a roving biennial, how are the cities actually selected, along which criteria, and who does that? And then following that question, how are the curators or the curatorial collectives matched to that process?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. And one of the curators who is matched by the context, as you say, sitting next to me, Katarina Gregos, is part of the curatorial team of Manifesta 9, who's going to work in Genk, 12 miles west of Maastricht. Actually, two ways. Cities or regions are able to make a bid on basis of an urge or a need why Manifesta should come to their region. So, for example, referring to your situation, there's no, to what Nazim is saying, there's now a bid from a city in Russia who is explicitly saying, we would like to use Manifesta as a temporarily critical curatorial training school, not for one session of 100 days, but for actually the whole 2 years. So there's cities who make a bid on basis of different proposals being made on basis of the identity or the lack of resources or infrastructure, and they see Manifesta as a potential catalyst, playing a certain role in a certain period of time. What we do is we research those bids according to a series of criteria, like, for example, would it be interesting at this moment to change the model of a representational format of a biennial into a school or into a curatorial training program, and what is needed and who can we accommodate with this. Secondary, if we have made this selection, then the whole funding system is going to be partly is paid by the local, regional or national funding, part is paid by European and private funding, and then a series of proposals from curators, mostly independent curators, are invited. They are coming, like last time, 3 curators were invited to do like an architectural pitch, to do a paid research of 3 weeks on the site, and inviting anybody they wanted to see, anybody they wanted to speak to, from academic level to artists, to writers, to theoreticians, and they are making a proposal which is then judged by an international board which is composed of theoreticians, museum directors, and so forth. And from the last 3 proposals, Cuauhtemoc, Mexican-based curator Cuauhtemoc Medina was invited to realize his proposal, of which Katarina Gregos and Dawn Ades, art historian from London, are part of the team. And then they, from that moment, they are in charge. But as you see, the research period is done before the curators come in. So at least there is a kind of a link between the topos and everything what is needed and the selection of the curators. And this is also a lesson learned from previous editions. Is that answering your question?
Thank you. Next question, please. Hold on for the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Susan Platt, and I wanted to ask Katarina Gregos, whose fantastically good pavilion I saw in Venice, and also compliment her on the catalog. Do you have the catalog with you? It's full of incredibly insightful discussions about the issue. So my question is, do you anticipate doing any more with this theme? It was ironic that this theme was also at the same time as the Arab Spring and the uprisings in Greece and all of these other places.
First of all, I have to say I have the very generous amount of 3 catalogues on the table. If anyone wants one desperately, they're very welcome to it. The Danish Pavilion, in fact, continues a trajectory of work that I've done related to kind of human rights in general. I think also our manifesto is going to reflect quite a lot of the issues that we discussed today. And following that, I'm also curating an exhibition in Belgium in 2012 on the theme of human rights, which is going to coincide with the opening of the new Holocaust Museum and Documentation Center for Human Rights in Belgium. So all my work actually is in a sense related. It is interested in issues such as civil rights, human rights, etc., etc. And the Danish Pavilion, in fact, worked within that trajectory in that context.
Next question. There's a hand.
Hi. This question might be directed mostly to Nazim, Richard, Dikbas, okay, and also to Katarina. And it's about the event that happened at the Sharjah Biennial against Mustafa Ben Fadil's installation, which was placed in a public courtyard and then deemed offensive by a religious segment of the population and then subsequently removed without any sort of dialogue developing around it. So I wondered if you could respond to that and if you think that it was some sort of a flashpoint that could maybe make us realize what segment of the population these biennials are really reaching and what segment it's not reaching, and how we can develop a dialogue to include a larger section of the public.
Well, I have to say I've always been a little bit skeptical of a biennial that takes place in a region of the world where human rights are definitely not on the top of the agenda and where women's rights are non-existent. So what happened is in fact understandable. It poses a lot of questions about the function of biennials in such regions, and there I think we need to ask questions about why biennials are happening in specific geographic areas. Very often, as in the case of a lot of like cultural development in these countries, I think it has to do very much with kind of, you know, positioning yourself in the international map and buying kind of status through culture. I've never actually visited the Sharjah Biennial myself, but I think that what happened was totally to be expected, and it's something that I think one should reflect on curatorially and as an artist. I often wonder sometimes, and I know it's very difficult for artists to say no, but I've often wondered, I'll bounce the question back to you, and I often wonder why artists agree to work in such situations when in fact the boundaries that they're trying to push are already stopped from the very beginning. And that's a very complex question that I think cannot be answered right now.
Yeah. I've never been to the Sharjah Biennial either, but I followed the incident closely, and I was surprised, even in this day of Twitter and social media, that it was reported so little. I was looking for, you know, detailed, I don't know, descriptions of what exactly happened after I heard about it on Facebook. And it just didn't happen for a while, and that was surprising. And of course your first reaction, the more cynical reaction, is, oh, I'm surprised it didn't happen before. But maybe we should try to go beyond that. I could also see, for instance, international artists, a foreign artist looking at Turkey and saying, I won't come to Turkey, there's a huge human rights issue in Turkey, why should I come to Turkey? And that makes it a very difficult, you know, question to answer. Whether or not the Sharjah Biennial manages to reach the wider society, the wider population there, I don't know. It doesn't look like it does. But I mean, I would have to be much better informed to answer that question. Here, human rights continue to be a very burning issue. This year we organized a big exhibition called Where Fire Has Struck, with the participation of more than 120 artists at Depot. You might have been to Depot. It used to be a biennial venue as well. On the 20th anniversary of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, because this year their theme is social trauma, the effects of torture on various generations, and how torture is not an individual incident and how it affects society as a whole, both the victims and the perpetrators. And it's interesting to see how both, I don't know, these artists who want to work for human rights, who want to work for freedom of expression, inevitably find themselves within an art world which is then also subject to corporate interests, sponsorship, etc. In that sense, Turkey is, you know, there in between somewhere.
It's a very striking question, because we actually initially wanted to invite Mustafa here for the panel, but then we decided for Nazim as being from the Turkish point of view. But I think there's a lot of connections here, not only the work that was censored in Sharjah by him, also Biramadra made an exhibition in Venice, I believe in the pavilion, a new pavilion, Azerbaijan, which was censored, the works were taken away. So even also in Italy, in the Venice Biennale, which exists more than 100 years, there's, sorry? Yeah, there's at the same time, of course, Ai Weiwei was, it was a bit later, but he was put in prison, basically, or he disappeared because of his his urge and his need to express himself freely in China. And this is something I think Yonggu Li also later can talk about, because he was one of the co-curators of the last Guangzhou Design Biennale. The Guangzhou Biennale every other year changes from art to design. And Ai Weiwei was one of the curators of this year's Design Biennale, but of course he wasn't there in the end. Of course he was there, but he wasn't there. So, yeah, issues of censorship in biennales are, I think, a very important issue to discuss. I mean, in China there's a lot of biennales. We heard there's a new initiative in Beijing starting up. Of course, there's the Shanghai Biennale, where, as far as I heard, there is a propaganda committee that screens the exhibition prior to the opening, and works that are considered problematic are just simply taken out. I think it's an issue that we can discuss, because it's social media, and this was one of the topics also we wanted to discuss with this panel. Social media have opened up a lot of information, have perhaps democratized our society, but until when? Until how far? Is this a true democratization, or is this in fact a falsehood? Because, also the WikiLeaks, the Julian Assange situation, I mean, people that come up for their ideas, they're simply their ideas on society. And using these new media, which we have today, which in some cases, like in the northern African and currently Middle Eastern parts of the world, are helping these new techniques to mobilize people, etc. But at the same time, it has effects towards the people that sometimes, use these tools, these new communication tools, not in their benefit. Anyway, maybe there's one more other question we can. The ambassador, I would like to hear his question actually. Please use the microphone, because
I might be one of the few who had the pleasure of attending the Tashkent Biennale, which is organized in Uzbekistan every 2 years. We would not consider Uzbekistan to be a very free country. We would not consider Uzbekistan to be a country where artists would like to exhibit because of prospective buyers of their works of art. Nevertheless, I must say that the Tashkent Biennale 3 years ago was one of the most lively exhibitions that I ever attended, mostly because of the fact that the visitors of the Biennale were so thrilled because of the fact that all of a sudden, it might have been censored, it might have been not, but that all of a sudden works of art that they had never seen before in their lives. And these were not top-level artists exhibiting there. These were so-so Russians, so-so Kazakhs, and so on. But nevertheless, it was an event that the audience and, let's say, society in Tashkent liked very much. This is one. The other, some of you in the audience might know about it, some others might not. The Beijing Book Fair last month was the subject of a very strong controversy among Dutch writers, because Amnesty International had invited, rather not invited, but urged Dutch writers going there to protest the human rights situation in China. And what is very fascinating is that we would like to protest the human rights situation in China on the one hand, but on the other hand, we might need their dollars to save the Italian economy. We might need their purchasing power to keep Western economies alive. So protest, as far as China is concerned, is of a different kind than in the Tashkent Biennale or on the Tashkent Biennale. And this is a hypocrisy that we definitely should take into account. And this is a hypocrisy that the Dutch writers did not solve, because a few of them were willing to wear pins that human rights were being violated in China. But some others rightly said, well, if we wear these pins, no Chinese will talk to us, our books will not be sold, which from a commercial point of view is bad, but it's also bad from a point of view of dispersing ideas that might not be available in China. So before we, on the basis of censorship or whatsoever, say we won't attend, or we urge artists not to go there, we should take into consideration that the people who might go there might find ideas that might bring about maybe not an Arabic Spring, but some other kinds of springs. And what would an artist rather do than bring about revolution? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your engaged participation. I'd like to just to have the final question, and then we'll have a coffee break because we're already behind schedule. One more upstairs. Oh, somebody has to bring the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but we're recording. We want to.
Yeah, we are recording, so you should.
Okay, some of you were referring to the context of the biennial and the effects on a local level. And I must say, I'm a great admirer of the manifesto model, which has been quite innovative. But Hedwig, in your presentation, you stressed the importance for trying to innovate the biennial model. With so many new biennials on the world map, and with also the need to differentiate one to the other, and in the introduction, Moderator already said that this biennial seen the reaction in previous biennials. How do you see the sheer rising number of biennials as an effect on the biennial model itself? Is it something you try to change within Manifesto?
Well, I think my answer in this regard is very much that the rise, and I think Katarina and also Nazim has already raised the issue, many of the biennials are of course used for marketing purposes, for creating visibility or stimulating economical or cultural tourism. And there's nothing wrong about it, but I think there is a separated group of biennials or institutions or whatever they are called who have a different purpose, who want, and I think Manifesto is one of the few, and I am also not 100% sure how we can continue with the upcoming economical crisis and the situation we're in, because maybe Manifesto's model was only applicable in a certain decade, where in Europe this kind of freedom, this kind of generosity was able to fulfill a biennial which had the possibility to be critical, to have the possibility to raise new artistic, innovative, experimental formats which everybody is able to criticize, and at the same time, most important, I'm looking to you, to be aware of trying to circulate new artistic ideas without the constraints of the market. because until now the market in Manifesta is not present. So we were able to do this. At the same time, we had to very much be aware of how to create awareness, visibility, as you are saying, and I think this is in Manifesta. Many of the artistic scenes in which we are entering, embedding ourselves for 2 years, say like you are doing, Nazim, the creation of a visibility has stimulated also the local art scene and has created for us a platform on which we can continuously, and then we're talking about what kind of sustainability can a roving event occur. And but I want to stress, let's not raise our expectation enormously. It's tiny little changes we can make. And I'm also not 100% sure, under the current economical conditions in Europe and under the current political situation in Europe, that something like Manifesta is always ever to be developed. Because, for example, many people are critically asking me, why never, there was only one Manifesta in Eastern Europe, and you're trying to gap the East-West dialogue. Hey, what is this? This is almost becoming rhetorical. There are many possibilities, and there were many possibilities, but also there were multi-billionaires who wanted to have Manifesta, but then you're completely focused and embedded within this. There were impossible economical situations, so there is a lot of risks involved, and there is also a lot of securing this kind of freedom and this emergence. I see the future of Manifesta into long-term embeddingness of projects, as, for example, a curatorial school, maybe in Russia, maybe in Uzbekistan, where there is an urge and a need. If there's no need or urge for Manifesta, let's dissolve it.
Is that a future you see for all biennials?
I cannot speak for all biennials. I've been several times in Sharjah, and you only have to be there. I'm not going to tell you what is the purpose of the Sharjah biennial. I can only speak for Manifesta. Excuse me.
Okay, I'd like to end now. So we have time for a coffee break. Officially we'll start in 15 minutes again. I don't know if it's feasible what I'm saying, but I'm just saying so.